Hello and welcome to Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast, a podcast to inspire you about outdoor travel and activities in the UK and across the world. I'm Hannah and you can email me with your thoughts or questions on live@cicerone.co.uk. Today I'm talking to Will Renwick, gear reviewer at Outdoors Magic and president of Ramblers Wales. He's just back from an epic challenge running every mountain in Wales. That's 188 nuttals from their official list, plus one for good luck. He ran over 500 miles in 3 weeks because he couldn't get enough holiday time to run it, but also to raise money for an important mental health charity, Mountains Over Mind. Hi Will, so when did you get back?
I got back late on Monday evening after a really long train journey from North Wales, which wasn't ideal.
You weren't tempted to run back?
I'm not going to be running for a while. I'm not going to be lifting a finger for a while, to be honest. My girlfriend Hannah's already sick of waiting on me hand and foot. I think my free pass is already wearing off now.
Is it already? It's only been a few days.
I know, but I've already milked it.
Well, you're back to life with a bump today?
Yeah, that's kind of been the shock to the system, really, is all those kind of really boring parts of life, like taking the car to the garage, taking Hannah to the train station this morning. So I had to race to the station with her. Things like bills and whatever. It's just, you realise how fiddly life is when you've done something like spend the last 3 weeks with the sole aim of getting up in the morning, running, eating, sleeping, and that's about it. So it's a bit of a shock to the system, but I am still really glad to be home. It's very nice to have a roof over my head and a comfy bed and a sofa to sink into.
There is a nice level of escapism though, even when you're doing something really hard and uncomfortable. There's something lovely about just abandoning all reality and just going, right, all I've got to do today is get up and walk, and then I'll walk or I'll run or whatever, I'll cycle, and then at the end I'll have some food and go to sleep, and it's nothing extra.
It's just a simple life, a very, very simple life. And essentially a hand-to-mouth existence. And I think I will miss that a little bit. But the novelty of home comforts is also still very, very nice.
It's funny how fast you adapt back to it though, because when I went to Nepal, I remember coming back and having a shower where I could just switch on the water and it was going to be hot for as long as I wanted it. And I could just stay in the shower and just worship this hot water like it was a miracle. And then within a few days of being home, you're just so used to everything being really comfortable and nice and normal again. And it's a shame to lose that.
Yeah, I guess it's probably worth actually trying to just think about it every now and then, isn't it? Just think about how lucky we are to have the convenience of things like that and to cherish it a little bit.
Can you tell us a little bit about the challenge?
The idea for the challenge came about after I'd seen a BBC article about two guys, both of them called Mike, who had walked a route from South Wales to North Wales, taking in every mountain over 609 metres or everything over 2,000 feet. So essentially the Nuttals list. And I saw their squiggly line going from South Wales to North Wales. And in just an absolute instant, I thought that would be an incredible thing to do. I would love to do that. And that seed was planted and I just couldn't get it out of my head afterwards because I'm a bit of a kind of Wales obsessive. I absolutely love the Welsh landscape and I've spent my whole life exploring it essentially. When I was 18, I walked Offa's Dyke with a friend in between university terms, and I think that really ignited the flame really. And then after that, walked around Wales on the Wales Coast Path, linking up with the Offa's Dyke. I did the Cambrian Way a few years ago. So I'm just hooked on exploring our landscape and I just want to see every inch of it and explore all its wild places. And seeing that route, I looked at it and I thought, well, wow, that would take me through the Radnor Forest. I've never been there. That would take me through the Berwyns. I've never been there. The Arenigs. It just seemed like an obvious thing to do. But the problem was that they took 33 days to walk it. And ideally, I would have walked it. I'm a long distance walker by heart, but I couldn't see myself being able to take a month or more off from work. So I thought, well, what about if I tried to run it and tried to do it in about 3 weeks? If I could do 25 miles a day, that would take me 3 weeks. So then that became the aim.
I mean, training wise, people always talk about the benefit of having time on your feet, and you've always had time on your feet, haven't you? You've been walking for your whole life and you have been doing some ultra running as well. So I'm sure you were in a fairly strong state before you set off.
I suppose I did a little bit of training, but definitely not as much as I should have done. But I kind of resigned myself to the fact that how do you train for that kind of thing? Maybe a little bit of a naive approach, I suppose, and that did come back to bite me very early on in the challenge. But I think I actually managed to learn on the job in the end. And by the end of it, I was kind of a mountain running machine, I think. I remember once speaking to a professional ultra runner, and I said to him, do you think walking is good training for long distance running? And he laughed at me and he said, absolutely not. But I completely disagree. I think that having a base of endurance from long distance hiking can make you a good long distance runner. I think there are a couple of examples out there, like Damien Hall, who started out as a long distance hiker and now has become pretty much Britain's leading ultra runner. And I think Jasmine Paris as well, when she set the record for the Montaigne Spine race, and she won. She said that she'd spent a week hiking in the Alps as preparation. I think walking builds this level of endurance that I guess you can't really train in the gym for.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And when you're doing these really long races where they're over several days, your average running pace isn't actually that fast, is it? Because you do walk for big chunks of it.
Yeah, there are times where just running would be impossible. Places like the Rhinogs, where there are jagged rocks underfoot almost the entire way, and the gradient is just incredibly steep, and so you've got to hike. That said, some of the problems that I did have early on in the challenge were because I was trying to speed hike too much. So I think it's quite speed hiking or kind of power walking is a little bit of an unnatural motion. I think that was causing problems with my joints. Whereas if you're running, it's a slightly more fluid motion. And so ironically, when I stopped speed walking and started running properly, that's when some of the problems went away.
What was it like carrying all the stuff as well? Because you were completely unsupported, weren't you? So you had all the food that you needed and all your camping stuff. So you must have had a really heavy load.
Yeah, I thought long and hard about what kit I was going to be taking because I was going to be sleeping out in the elements and supporting myself. So I did carefully pick the kit that I was going to be taking and just made sure that the base weight of my pack was going to be as light as possible. So I think I started at 6 kilograms and it probably finished at 6 kilograms as well, because while I realized that some of the lightweight kit that I took to start with wasn't up to scratch for the Welsh weather, especially the conditions that I ended up having in the last week.
But actually 6 kilos, that's hardly anything. Quite impressed by that. I reckon there's quite a lot of kit geeks that really want to know exactly what you carried. Are you going to put something on Outdoors Magic about exactly what you took and do a bit of a kit review?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I learned a lot about outdoor gear and the kind of outdoor gear you need for this kind of trip and limitations of certain different types of outdoor gear, which was actually quite fascinating, really. But the pack weight was a struggle because while the base weight was 6 kilograms, for those stretches where it was particularly wild and I had to have a lot of food in my pack, you noticed it. It was so noticeable having those supplies, and so the pack did at times just feel ridiculously heavy. And in the past with long distance walking, I've kind of found that by the end of the trip, you almost don't feel like you're wearing the pack. You just don't feel the weight. But that was never the case with this run. It was just I was always aware of the weight on my back. But yeah, I'm very lucky with Outdoors Magic because my job is essentially as an outdoor gear reviewer. I was able to get to kind of fine tune my kit and call in the exact stuff that I wanted for it. But keep an eye on the website, Outdoors Magic, to see my write-up of what went well and what didn't. I think it should make quite interesting reading. So the kit list did change a little bit, but also by the end, I was shedding a lot of stuff quite quickly. So I started the run with 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of pants, a couple of t-shirts. And by the end of it, what I wore over the finish line was essentially all I had, just 1 pair of pants, pair of socks and 1 t-shirt and shorts.
Well, you were getting regularly rinsed out by the helpful weather. So you probably were quite clean by the end.
Yeah, personal hygiene was a bit of a challenge along the way. I said to myself before starting that I'd wash myself in streams and rivers, lakes and things, but the weather was so rough that, the last thing you want to do is strip down and jump in a stream when it's pouring down with rain. So like you said, often my means of keeping clean was actually just running through the rain and hoping it washed me. So yeah, that was one of the challenging elements of it, definitely.
How did you manage to stay warm? When you stopped, particularly, how did you stay warm?
Good question, actually. I'm not sure I did, really. I did have a good waterproof jacket, and I was really pleased with how that performed for me. It's a Hagloss Limb jacket. I pretty much wore it the whole time. It's one of those jackets that's very protective, but also breathable, so I could just wear it constantly. And then underneath, I had a layer of synthetic insulation. And I really, if anyone's considering a challenge that might be a bit damp, I'd say go for synthetic insulation. You won't regret it, because even if it does get soaked through, you're still going to get that warmth. And I think that was vital. The other ways I kept warm, I suppose, was taking any opportunity I could for shelter. So if I passed by a pub, I'd stop in and have a cup of tea. And a simple cup of tea can rescue a day. It can really turn things around. So I didn't deprive myself of those kind of luxuries. But then I remember a 4-day stretch where there wasn't a shop, wasn't a cafe, wasn't a pub, wasn't a campsite, absolutely nothing. So yeah, there's a lot of suffering because of that on the trip.
Yeah, I think people listening to this might be quite surprised when you say things like that there was 4 days of being so remote and so cut off and so isolated in Wales. I think people have got this picture of Wales, and it's maybe a really narrow picture of just Snowdonia and how crowded it is there, and, you know, a couple of other hotspots. But actually, there's huge chunks of Wales that people just either don't know about or ignore.
Yeah, the irony is that I was actually looking forward to getting to Snowdonia, which some would say is the wildest part of Wales, because I knew that there'd be much more in the way of cafes and pubs and campsites. Whereas in mid Wales, that's where it was really, really challenging. And that's where I had the 4-day isolated stretch. Yeah, it really is a wild place, mid Wales, especially around the area called the Arenigs, which is travel writers in the 19th century coined it the Green Desert of Wales. And it is a very appropriate name for it. It's a bleak but also a beautiful place as well, beautifully bleak in a way. And I was actually quite lucky to have quite good weather going through it. I've been through there before on the Cambrian Way, and I had terrible, terrible weather. And that's the kind of place where you don't want to be going through it with rough weather. But it was the nature of my route going through there as well. And actually throughout the whole of Wales, the nature of the route, it just kept me high all the time, high up on the tops. So there was no opportunity to drop down into a town or village. When there were opportunities to drop down to find facilities, it would just mean extra miles. It would mean a climb back up, and often that just wasn't an attractive option. So I had to make sure I was well supplied and stocked for barren stretches, essentially.
Well, you're the president of Ramblers Cymru, and you've been walking in and around Wales your whole life, and you're mad keen on Wales. You know, you were one of the first people to do the Wales Coast Path walk, but even for you, there were bits that you hadn't been to and explored, which is, again, another surprise, I think.
Yeah, the places that surprised me and that I'd say stood out as being particularly wild and surprising parts of Wales were the Berwyns, definitely. Also around Arans, which is near Bala. And then the stretch around Plynlimmon as well, and the Radnor Forest. Just some really, really beautiful parts of Wales. And actually, thinking back to them now, I'm looking forward to going back to see them again. And that was the wonderful thing about this run, just discovering all these new, incredible parts of Wales.
So getting back to the actual route, you said you were doing all the Nuttals. So the Nuttals, I don't know if you're aware, that John and Anne Nuttall are Cicero authors, and they compiled this list of the Nuttals, which are particular mountains. So you didn't choose which mountains to run, did you?
No, I didn't know. That was completely beyond my choice. It was, yeah, you're right. It was the Nuttall's list. I've been saying that I've been climbing 189 mountains, but actually I think the list stands at 188 at the moment. It's a real movable feast, and it's really hard to keep up with it. So I kind of nailed on to 189 because I know that the list is currently 188, but then the two people who walked the route a couple of years ago said that they climbed 190. So I figured 189 was a bit of a safe bet. And I ended up following the GPX route that the two people who walked it had created. But then also, to be safe, every 3 days, I'd sit down in my tent and I'd kind of mark out each one that I need to take in along the way. And that was quite a difficult part of the journey, actually. And I was kicking myself a little bit that I didn't do more prior planning in terms of marking out those Nuttals, because the actual worry of missing one was quite a lot of pressure. To think that after 2 weeks of running, I could look at the map and think, oh, hang on, 3 days ago, I missed out a mountain. And then I'm thinking, well, do I then just stop or do I carry on? And I did actually, it did come to that situation one day. I'd had a really hard day in the Moelwynion, very, very misty, windy and wet. I'd been running around like a headless chicken, bagging nuttles in every direction. And that night I had my first hotel of the trip and I couldn't wait for it. I was so excited. And I ran a bath, got into the bath, the first time I'd actually properly washed on the whole trip, opened up the Go for a Walk website to check my route for the next day. And an outlying nuttle suddenly caught my eye on the map. And in the back of my mind, kind of alarm bells went off. And I thought, hang on, I don't remember that. And I said to myself, just don't look at it because you don't want to know what that mountain is and whether you've done it or not. And I thought, but if I get to the end of this trip, that mountain will always be in the back of my mind that I didn't do it. And sure enough, I realized that I had missed it out. And I was quite lucky because actually it wasn't too far off my route to go and rebag. The name of it is Moel Penamnen, and it's just beyond Moel Shabod near Blaenau Festiniog. And it meant actually about 3 days later into my trip, I had to make, I'd say about a half-day detour to go and rebag it. I'm not a ticker or a peak bagger kind of thing who's in it for the numbers, that kind of thing. I wanted to have a fun trip. So would it really have mattered if I'd missed out a mountain? Would I have stopped? I'm not sure. I think, to be honest, and I feel quite guilty about it, I did end up being very, very focused on climbing every mountain in Wales rather than the adventure side of things. And before I set out, I said to my partner, Hannah, don't worry, if it stops being fun, I'll stop. About 2 weeks in, it did stop being fun because of the switch in weather. But after 2 weeks of a 3-week trip, can you stop? I thought, no, not after everything I've done. I've got to just get through the final week.
Yeah, you've got to find things to motivate you, haven't you? You've still got to have something that makes you carry on when things are hard and everything's hurting and it's cold and you're hungry. But I think for you, what must have been really motivating was the charitable aspect. And that sounded to me like that was another really big part of why you did this, to raise money for the charities Mountains Over Mind.
Yeah, it's been incredible, actually, because I originally set out to raise £2,000 for them. And the total, I think we reached that target on the first day of my trip. And it's just been going up and up and up and up and up. And I think we might even have just hit £12,000, which is incredible. And it's a small charity and it's quite a young charity. And I like to think that money will make a big, big difference. And they do such fantastic stuff. I've been saying that they don't just change lives, they save lives with what they do. So yeah, I've been incredibly proud to work with them and support them. If anyone listening isn't familiar with Mind Over Mountains, it's worth having a look at what they do. So they essentially provide memorable outdoor experiences for people who are going through difficult periods with their mental health and struggling with their well-being. And they give people access to nature. They take them to places that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. And I've always been really lucky that accessing the wild places of Wales has been quite easy for me, but I appreciate that for a lot of people it isn't so easy. So if I can help people access it through Mind Over Mountains, yeah, I'd be very proud.
Like you said, they're not changing lives, they're saving lives. What more could you ask for? It's fantastic. What a great charity to raise money for, and what a great challenge.
Yeah, shout out to Hannah, Chris and Alex for what they do. They're excellent charity. And I think, yeah, that money will make a big difference to them.
I think the money will, and I think there'd be loads of people who don't realise what benefit being outside can have on your mental health. And actually, it doesn't need to be something crazy like you've done, running all these mountains, but actually just being outside, having that connection with nature, going for a little walk, anything like that. It's always been something that I've clung to when my mental health has dipped. It's so important to me. And I think there's probably people who haven't experienced that. And it's a really nice thing to have in your armory of tools, I guess, that, when I'm feeling a bit this way or that way, I know now that I can go out for a walk or I can get some fresh air at the top of the hill and just be helped by that.
It can completely change your frame of mind, can't it? You can go for a quick walk. Like you said, it doesn't have to be anywhere particularly wild, but more often than not, you'll come back feeling a little bit better, at least, and in a different state of mind, I think. And that's something that I definitely say has always applied to me.
Yeah, especially if you can go out and get warm nice and easily and just pop the kettle on and make a brew. That's kind of more comfortable, but there's something really nice, even in all weathers. I think there's just something nice about being on the top of a hill, or I quite like going out and looking at the sea and just having that very real sense of perspective that we are small and the world is big. And there's something about the big skies and the big views that just make me feel quite insignificant in quite a comforting way. I'm sure that doesn't work for everybody, but for me, it's just a really nice thing.
I don't think we're awakening our senses enough either, or we're not utilising them as much as we could. And getting out in the elements really can set off different kind of parts of your mind, can't it? Smells, the sounds, and the feel of the wind hammering into your face. You know, when we're sat on the sofa watching TV, you're not getting that kind of kick at all, are you?
Yeah, there's some good pictures on your Instagram of you getting that sort of kick. To be honest, looking at some of the pictures, I do almost feel the wind in my face, because you've got like a face of pain and shiny eyes and a bit of a grimace, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can feel what he's going through right there.
There was a lot of that. There was a lot of that kind of suffering, yeah. But I think in some of those pictures you can kind of see that there's also a bit of a glint in my eye, because although at the time that it felt very, very difficult, in hindsight, I think people talk about type 2 fun, and actually I'm starting to reminisce already. It's only a few days since I got back, but I'm thinking, yeah, that was a little bit fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, when I first got into outdoor stuff, I had a teacher who used to talk about things as a retrospective pleasure. So we'd have like some horrific day outside, and I'd hate every second of it. And we'd be in the minibus on the way back, and he'd say, it's a retrospective pleasure. And as soon as I got home, I started thinking, actually, yeah, that was great.
I think it's only really in the outdoors that I get that kind of, like you say, retrospective pleasure as well, or type 2 fun. I can't think of many other instances in my life where that applies, really.
Yeah, it's odd. There's something quite addictive about it.
What keeps us going, definitely, yeah.
Why did you choose October?
Good question. Very good question. I was asking myself that quite a lot. I think in the end, certain things just ended up. It was really hard actually finding the 3 weeks to do this. I changed the date of it quite a lot. I think I originally set out to do it about 2 years ago, and the pandemic got in the way. Just finding the 3 weeks was really hard. And yeah, if I could have done it earlier in the year, that would have made things a lot easier, because once October rolled around, things started to feel very autumnal and very, very cold by the end of it. I genuinely don't think I could have stomached another night out in the elements. Things had got that challenging by the end.
Yeah, there was one thing I was reading where you said you just kind of crawled into your tent and you didn't even get in your sleeping bag. You just sat there in all your wet kit. And again, it almost makes me feel soggy and sad and cold thinking of what you must have felt like when you were doing that.
That was the last night as well. The last night of the whole challenge, which is why the whole thing was so tough right up until the bitter end. Yeah, that was in the Carneddau, and I told myself that, right, okay, by the end of today, I'd like to be here so that tomorrow I can just roll down into Conwy at the finish. And the weather and the wind really hampered my plans, and I was out until about 9 o'clock in the wind and rain, climbing kind of very rocky, bouldery mountains, trying to make up the time. And in the end, I just thought, what are you doing here? Why do you need to do this? So I saw a flat patch of grass and just decided to throw my tent up, and I got in and everything was soaked through. And I just sat there and just had a moment thinking, like, why are you doing this? But then also just the realization that, well, actually, you don't have to do this for much longer. This is pretty much as bad as it's going to get for you now. And it was quite strange on the train home up the next day, thinking that only about 12 hours earlier, the kind of horrible situation I'd been in, and how long ago that then seemed, how far away from that situation I was. But yeah, I'm already looking back on that time fondly now with kind of a bit of nostalgia.
Yeah, Hannah will be looking for you tonight, and you'll be sat in your garden in the rain just going, I just miss it. So, I mean, you've been back for 2 days now. Have you got anything planned next, or are you still in recovery?
I've been saying to everyone that I just want to lead a quiet country life for the next few weeks or months. But now that the injuries are starting to kind of fade away, and I suppose the oversimplicity of normal life is starting to kind of mean that certain ideas are creeping into my mind. Take me back to the mountains, where all I need to worry about is where I can get some chocolate bars. I did an interview with a magazine yesterday and they asked the same question. And for some reason, the Paddy Buckley just popped into my head. Kind of ideas like that are starting to creep in, because what I learned from the run was that I really surprised myself with my endurance, and I enjoyed running in the mountains, and I'd quite like to do a little bit more and and see where that I suppose you could say newfound endurance can take me. So perhaps one day I'd like to have a crack at the Paddy Buckley and see if I can do it in 24 hours, but still very, very early days. Like I said, quiet life in the country for me for now.
I think the endurance thing is a really good point, because you hadn't done loads of training. You weren't at your fittest when you set off. You had a couple of injuries. And for me anyway, it's being able to continue when things aren't going well that is the key to the endurance. You know, if you were just Superman and everything was working and you could keep going forever, it's less impressive to be able to do that than actually when things are starting to hurt and you've got niggly injuries and you can somehow power through.
There was a lot of, I suppose, physical and mental endurance with it. So there was a lot of decision making that had to be done. And that was really challenging. Each day I had to think about which route I'd be taking, how far I could aim, how fast I needed to go, where I could resupply, how I'd handle the route given the weather forecast. I'm thinking about the point at which I was in Snowdonia, and my preset route meant that the next day would be going up the Nantlle Ridge. But the weather forecast said that it was going to be very, very bright and clear that day. And then all the rest of the days after it were going to be horrendously stormy and miserable. And I decided that actually I was going to add more miles onto my trip by instead of going up the Nantlle Ridge, I'd add on more miles and take on the Snowdon Massif while the weather was good, which meant climbing Crib Goch and traversing its kind of knife edge ridge, and Llywydd, the other ridge on the other side, in conditions that were safe rather than stormy conditions where I could be putting myself in a bit of a tricky situation. So it meant a lot more miles onto my day in a kind of very inconvenient route, but I was actually really glad that I made that decision to reroute and take it on in better conditions. So there are a lot of moments like that where I had to make a decision just purely by myself. And that was a very hard aspect of the trip. But like I said, I'm proud of those decisions that I made. And I definitely learned a lot about myself and what I'm capable of from the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's really important, having the flexibility in your plan to be able to move things around so that things are safer. You know, you don't want to be doing those in really bad weather, and you probably took a much safer decision that maybe you wouldn't have been able to had you been fixated on doing it in a set number of days or a set time.
Yeah, and because of that, I had to check myself sometimes and say, look, what's the sensible thing to do here, rather than the one-track minded way of doing things.
Do you think you'll get people now who try to do it quicker and quicker?
I'd love it to be a thing.
The Will Renwick Round?
Yeah.
Actually, that's too hard to say.
The Renwick Round or the Renwick Run or something.
Yeah, the Renwick Round's fine. The Will Renwick Round is a bit of a tongue twister.
Probably a bit too much, yeah. So it had only been walked, I think, by the two people beforehand, and no one had run it. So yeah, it would be amazing if someone else had a crack at it. I don't mind whether they do it faster at all. I will personally be there at the finish line because I think it's just such an interesting route. And the fact that it is a squiggly line, but I don't think there are many countries that could have such a somewhat linear link up between all the mountains. I can't think of anywhere else where it could be so south to north or so relatively straight. I think it's got potential to be a thing, and I very much encourage someone else to take it on, so long as you're aware that you're in for a pretty rough few weeks, that's for sure.
All right, well, this is a call for all the ultra runners in the UK. Should we at Damien Hall with this one and say, come on, Damo, take on the Renwick Round?
He's who I've got in mind, actually. Yeah, this is a personal call out. Damien Hall, it's up to you now.
Yeah, he'll love it. He'll probably do it in, I don't even know what he'd do it in, 3 days or something, no sleep.
Yeah, probably would.
He's a machine. Well, yeah, you've done an incredible thing, raised, what did you say, nearly £12,000 for Mountains Over Mind, and just incredible. By the time this podcast goes out, it'll probably be even more. How can people donate to the charity?
I've got a Just Giving page. It's justgiving.com/Wales190. That would be the best way to find it. If anyone could spare some money, I'd be so grateful. It's been amazing to see the money go up, and I'm really, really proud of the total so far, and I'd love to keep growing it.
And how can people find out more about you and what you're up to next?
Outdoorsmagic.com would be a good place to keep an eye on, but also my social media. So on Instagram, I'm Will_Renwick. Twitter, I'm Will Walks Wales.
Not on TikTok yet?
Not on TikTok, no. I've been keeping off that. There's already too many social media channels for me to keep up with. Saying that during the 3 weeks of running, I was posting quite regularly on social media, and it was actually so nice to have this kind of virtual army of support behind me. Someone got in touch on Instagram saying, "Hey, Will, it looks like you're going past our farm. If you want a cup of tea or coffee, just knock on our door." And it was like a guardian angel coming out from nowhere. And this person's farm was right on my route, exactly where I needed it. And I knocked on the door, and it led to me staying in the caravan in their farmyard, and them giving me the most delicious soup I've ever tasted. and then they sent me off with a packed lunch, and it was just, that took me from a real low to a real high. There's so many instances like that on the trip. Carrie, if you're listening, thank you very much. That was just transformative for me.
I think the outdoor community is very kind and friendly. I think you find that a lot when you're out in the hills and people just chatting and saying hi. It is a really nice group of people.
I think also it's just a kind of like a smile or hello, or just someone stopping and asking what you're up to or where you're heading. With these kind of challenges where you're in these kind of isolated mountain parts alone for such a long time, that can make a massive difference, just having a bit of interaction with people. There was so many nice people I met along the way. It's it just goes such a long way, just a friendly hello or something.
Yeah, thanks, Will. That was really cool. That's really interesting.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure. It all feels worth it now. Like I said, to be back with a roof over my head and a comfy sofa to sink into, and the fundraising total, all absolutely worth it. I don't regret anything.
I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast. I'd love to know what you think, or if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Please email live@cicerone.co.uk or leave a review on your podcast platform. You can follow or subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss new episodes, or you can sign up to our newsletter for all our latest news, events and guidebooks. Visit cicerone.co.uk for further details. We'll be back soon, but please come and join us on our social channels. We're on all the main ones as Cicerone Press, and we also have a Facebook group, Cicerone Connect, where you can meet and chat to other outdoor enthusiasts. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you soon.